Picture this. It's the summer of 1967, and in the Middle East, you can feel the tension in the air. Decades of simmering conflict are about to boil over into a war so fast, so utterly decisive, that it would completely redraw the map of the region in less than a single week. This is the story of those 6 days.
So let's just jump right into it, because that's really the heart of what we're talking about today. A war that was shorter than your average work week. But its consequences, we're still feeling them today. So how on earth did it happen? And what was the unbelievable cost?
You see, the Israeli victories in 1948 and 1956, they didn't bring peace. Not at all. In fact, the Arab coalition, led by Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, was more determined than ever to flip the script. So for both sides, it really wasn't a question of if there'd be another war, but when. The whole situation was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And boy, did that clock start ticking fast in May of '67. It all kicked off with some bad intel from the Soviet Union to Egypt. You know, a classic Cold War move to stir the pot. This leads Egypt to move troops into the Sinai and kick the UN peacekeepers out. But the real point of no return? May 22nd. That's when Egypt blockaded the Straits of Tiran, which basically choked off a critical Israeli shipping route. For Israel, that was it. That was an act of war. By June 4th, the decision was made.
And when you look at the numbers, it's just staggering. On paper, the Arab coalition had this overwhelming advantage. We're talking more than double the troops, 3 times the number of tanks, and a massive 3-to-1 advantage in the air. The odds were, to put it mildly, not in Israel's favor.
So, knowing they couldn't possibly win a long, drawn-out war, Israel's strategy had to be, well, audacious. It all came down to a single, massive preemptive strike. The idea was to cripple their enemies before the ground war could even really get started. The name of this plan was Operation Moked, and it would all go down in just a few short hours. Imagine this. It's 7:45 in the morning on June 5th. Nearly the entire Israeli Air Force takes off. They fly super low, way under the radar, and in total radio silence. To Egyptian radar operators, to the entire world really, it was like they just vanished into thin air. The amount of planning that went into this was just incredible. A total masterclass in deception. Israeli media was part of it, running fake stories about soldiers going on vacation. The pilots had practiced these attack runs over and over again. They even reportedly damaged the U.S. Embassy's monitoring gear to make sure no warnings got out. And then, the crucial part. A mix of perfect timing and sheer luck meant Egypt's air defenses were caught completely, totally off guard. The result was devastating. In just 3 hours, the Israeli Air Force wiped out 338 Egyptian aircraft, most of them before they ever left the runway. Later that day, when Jordan and Syria joined the fight, Israel destroyed their air forces too. The grand total of Arab aircraft destroyed on day 1, 419. And Israel? They lost only 19. In a single morning, they had achieved total, absolute air supremacy. So with complete ownership of the skies, it was time for the ground war. And Israel didn't hold back. They launched a massive, simultaneous attack on 3 different fronts against 3 different armies, starting with the biggest one, the Sinai. Israel's whole plan was to hit them where they weren't expecting it, attacking through unexpected routes in the north. The initial push definitely got Egypt by surprise, but they fought back hard, and you had these fierce tank battles at key spots like Abu Agela. The Israeli advance was tough, but it was steady. But you know what? The real breaking point wasn't a battle. It was an order. Right, so this is the moment everything changes. Hearing that Abu Agela had fallen, the Egyptian commander, Field Marshal Amer, just panics. He orders a full, unconditional withdrawal. But the order was a mess. It didn't say how or when, turning what should have been an organized retreat into an absolute disaster, with Israeli planes just picking off the Egyptian columns from above. Now here's a fascinating bit. Israel had actually tried to keep Jordan out of the war. They sent messages saying, hey, stay neutral and we won't attack you. But Egypt's President Nasser convinced Jordan's King Hussein that Egypt was winning big time. Believing him, Jordan jumped in and the war's focus suddenly shifted to the ancient, iconic city of Jerusalem. So Jordan opens up by shelling West Jerusalem. Israel's response? Fast and furious. Paratroopers were sent in to take this heavily fortified spot called Ammunition Hill, and it turned into this brutal, hand-to-hand fight that cost so many lives. With the tide turning, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan gave the historic, controversial order to enter the Old City. And by June 7th, it was done. The entire West Bank and all of Jerusalem were in Israeli hands. So Egypt and Jordan are essentially defeated. That leaves just one front, Syria. But this might have been the most difficult of all. This was the fight for the strategic high ground that had been a thorn in Israel's side for years. Okay, so why was the Golan so critical? Well, just picture a massive, fortified plateau that looms over everything. For years, Syrian artillery up there had been shelling Israeli farms and villages down in the valley. Life was a constant state of alert. Taking that high ground was seen as absolutely essential for Israel's security. And for the first 4 days of the war, Syria did exactly that, just relentlessly shelling Israeli towns. The Israeli command was hesitant. An uphill charge against fortified bunkers? That's a recipe for a bloodbath. But with the other fronts secure, Diane gave the order on June 9th, attack. And the fighting was just savage. The terrain was brutal, but with help from the air, Israeli soldiers fought their way up the slopes. By nightfall, they were on the plateau. By June 10th, they had control, right as a UN ceasefire kicked in. The fighting was over. In just 132 hours, the war had been won. But the ripple effects of this unbelievable military victory would create a whole new reality in the Middle East and plant the seeds for the next 50 years of conflict. First, you just have to look at the human toll. And these numbers they're stark. For Israel, almost 1,000 soldiers died, a staggering number for such a small country. But for the Arab nations, the losses were catastrophic, especially for Egypt, with maybe 15,000 dead, an immense tragedy packed into just 6 days. But the most visible outcome, the thing you can see right away, was the map itself. It was completely rewritten. Israel had captured the Gaza Strip and the entire Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. It more than tripled its territory. And with all of that new land came a massive new demographic challenge. Overnight, Israel was now governing about 1 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. This military occupation, which some thought would be temporary, became the absolute core issue of the conflict, creating a political problem that is still unsolved today. And here's the thing, even though it was a total military victory, it didn't stop the violence, not by a long shot. As our source material points out, this was not the final war. Another huge conflict, the Yom Kippur War, would break out just 6 years later, and its roots were planted directly in the events of 1967. Which really brings us to the big final question, doesn't it? There is absolutely no doubt that Israel achieved one of the most stunning military victories in modern history. But, as we've seen time and again, winning a war and winning a lasting peace are two very, very different things. And that is the complicated legacy of those 6 incredible days in June.